In this lecture, let's implement rate limiting in order to prevent the same IP from making too many requests to our API. And that will then help us preventing attacks like denial of service or brute force attacks. So that rate limiter will be implemented as a global middleware function. So basically what the rate limiter is going to do is to count the number of requests coming from one IP, and then when there are too many requests, block these requests. Okay? And so it makes sense to implement that in a global middleware. So we do that in app.js. So we haven't used this one in a long time, and the rate limiter that we're going to use is an npm package called express rate limit. So let's install that. npm e express rate limit. All right. And then here at the top of our application, let's call it rate limit. And then require the express. And actually it's already here. So VS Code grabs this name from our package.json file. Okay. And this name that I gave it here usually comes from the documentation. So if they do it like this in the documentation, well, then that's the way that I follow as well. Okay, so let's now use this middleware right here at the top of our global middlewares. Let's actually write that here, global. And we start by creating a limiter. So limiter, and we do that by calling the rate limit function that we just defined up there. So rate limit is a function which receives an object of options. Okay, and in here we can basically define how many requests per IP we are going to allow in a certain amount of time. So we can specify the max property, which I'm going to set to 100, and then also the window, so the time window. Okay, so what I want to allow here is basically 100 requests per hour. And this here is actually called window milliseconds. Okay, and so we want 1 hour, so 60 minutes times 60 for seconds times 1000 for milliseconds. All right, so again, what this will do is to allow 100 requests from the same IP in 1 hour. Okay, and if that limit is then crossed by a certain IP, they will get back an error message. And here we can now specify that message. Too many requests from this IP. Please try again in an hour. All right. So we kind of need to find a balance which works best for our application. For example, if you're building an API which really needs a lot of requests for one IP, then of course this number here should be greater. So don't just follow blindly what I just put here, but really adapt it to your own application so that you don't make it unusable because of this limiter. All right. Anyway, this limiter now here that we just created is basically a middleware function. Okay. So rate limit is a function which will, based on our objects, create a middleware function, which we now can use using app.use, just like we did before. And we can do it simply like this, but what we actually want is to basically limit access to our API route. No, so we can specify that here. Remember that we can do that with middleware. And so we basically want to apply this limiter only to /API. Okay, and so that will then affect all of the routes that basically start with this URL, so with /API. Great. So let's go back to our main tab here, give it a save, and now let's actually try this, and let's do it here with the simplest one. So get all tours, then here is our result, and now what I want to show you is these headers here. So our rate limiter creates these two headers, so the rate limit and the rate limit remaining. Okay, so we start with 100 just as we defined, and now we have remaining 99 because we already did one request, right? So what happens if we do another one Let's do it with getTour, for example. And there's no tour with that ID, but that doesn't matter. What matters here is that the remaining is now down to 98. And if we try it again, then you see it's even down further to 97. Okay? And actually down here, we also have the reset. So basically the timestamp where it is resetted. Okay? So that 1 hour window that we specified before. Okay? Now, if in between this or app is restarted, so in order to do that, I will simply save. Let's see what happens then. Okay, so I'm sending it again. And so now we're back starting from the beginning, basically. Okay, so our app cannot crash during this time because otherwise that will basically then reset the limit as well. Okay, now let's actually try to see the error message. And so I will take down this maximum to just 3. Okay, then save it here. Send this request, and in our headers we now see we have only 2 remaining. Let's try another one, and so now 0 remaining. So this probably was our last one. Let's see the body. So this time we still got data, but if we now try it again, we get an error. So too many requests from this IP, and then it will automatically set the status code to 429, which means too many requests. Okay? And so again, this will help us try to prevent denial of service and also brute force attacks where an attacker tries to guess the password of some user basically by using, as the name says, brute force. Okay, so that is API limiting, quite straightforward to implement with this Express rate limit package.